Honesty in communication, whether it's professional or personal, wherever, is a very a value of mine that is pretty much uncompromised. At work, if you make a mistake or something happens, I have found that being honest about it and taking accountability for things that you could have done better or you were mistakes. A, you learn about it, and B, it conveys to whoever it is you're interacting with a high level of personal integrity to be able to say, I messed up. I'm sorry. How can I fix this? That personal integrity I find that comes with honesty is invaluable.
Friends, welcome back to the Baruah podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Jennifer Miksis-Olds. Dr. Olds is the director of the Center for Acoustics Research Education and a research professor at the University of New Hampshire. She has served as the vice chair for the Board of Trustees for the Consortium of Ocean Leadership and is a fellow of the Acoustical Society of America. Her research focuses on ocean soundscapes, animal communication, and the impact of environmental changes on marine life. Dr. Olds holds degrees from Harvard University, the University of Rhode Island, and the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. I had the pleasure of working at her lab last summer as I interned as a student in ocean acoustics, and it was a pleasure having her on my podcast. We talk extensively about ocean acoustics, but we also dive deep into the impact of climate change on our oceans, the journey that Dr. Olds followed in her career path, the importance of honest communication, intellectual curiosity, and the impact of technology on attention and our lives today. I really enjoyed this episode, so I hope you will as well. And now, Dr. Olds. Jen, how are you doing today?
Great. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure having you on. I really enjoyed working in your lab last summer. Learned a lot from the experience. I definitely refined my interest in computer science that I'll be going to pursue at Michigan next year, but it was a pleasure working with you in your lab, and I got a pretty good idea of the research you do as I was working alongside you in marine acoustics. But for the sake of the podcast, how about we start with just describing me what you do? If anyone came and asked you, like, what do you do for work? How would you describe that?
Sure. I would say I am an acoustician or a marine bioacoustician, which means that I use acoustic technology to study the ocean and the life within it. And so with passive acoustics, we put instruments called hydrophones out into the ocean, and which record just the ambient sound. And from those recordings, we can harvest all sorts of information. And then we also use active acoustic sensors called echo sounders that are typically found on any fishing boat. A depth finder is essentially an echo sounder. And we put those out on the bottom looking up towards the surface, so we can record echoes and backscatter from fish and plankton. So by combining both the passive acoustic data that we get and the active acoustic data that we get, we can start to look at things like predator-prey dynamics and ecosystem dynamics. So I would say that kind of sums up what I do.
Nice. So what are some of these the research you collect from these data sounds? Like, what are they most useful for in their application sense? Like, we understand, okay, how these predator and prey interact. We understand like how ecosystem changing over time. What do you think is the most like useful application of this research?
Wow. So we did a project for about 10 years in the Bering Sea, off the coast of Alaska. And we had both active and passive sensors out there. And one of the things that we were seeing was really looking at the impact of global climate change on that subarctic ecosystem. So working with a postdoc of mine, Dr. Carrie Seger, we looked at how the ranges, home ranges or traditional ranges of marine mammals might be expanding, and identified 4 temperate marine mammal species that expanded their range up into the Arctic, into the Bering, and then into the Chukchi Seas. So we definitely are seeing range expansion of marine life in response to global warming. We also looked at how changes in physical oceanography, like there's the cold pool. So there's a cold pool in the Bering Sea that is just a very low layer of cold water that sustains throughout the summer season. And that cold water really differentiates marine life. So there are some that are cold water tolerant and some marine life that are not cold water tolerant. And so there's a physical barrier there when it comes to physical oceanography. And as our oceans warm, that cold pool is becoming weaker and weaker and less pronounced. And we were able to really look at the relationship between those cold pool dynamics, secondary productions such as zooplankton, and then the consumers, the marine mammals, and really looked at the dynamics between the marine mammals and what they were consuming and during when the cold pool is strong compared to when the cold pool is weak. And it was really interesting to see for some species, there's a strong relationship between cold pool and presence, and other species there wasn't. So it was kind of nice to be able to really dive in and look in detail about how a single oceanographic feature manifests all the way to the top predators of the ecosystem.
I see. And in terms of climate change, I've heard a lot of different perspectives on how big of a problem really is it and what are we going to do about it. And I think years ago, one of the perspectives that I heard about the most is that, well, our climate has changed so much over 1,000 years of like history, or even like hundreds of thousands of years of history, that it won't matter as much. But more and more as I recently read, I see like the rate of expansion is so high that it can match like a pretty significant change. So I know you mentioned that a lot of the marine life is kind of adapting to it by maybe migrating and moving to different locations. So how do you think they will be able to survive despite the massive changes in temperature? What do you think is like, how big of a deal is this really problem in the world today?
Um, from a marine life perspective, animals that live in the ocean have been evolving with their environment for years. And so the things that we're seeing, for example, changes in distribution, is part of that evolution process. There are species, for example, that are more resilient than others. So those more resilient species, we might see different behaviors or distributions, but I think that, they will sustain whatever the global climate change does to the oceans. Other species are more sensitive and very connected to specific, more narrow ranges of environmental variables, and they may be more susceptible to long-term population decreases related to global climate change. But we're still trying to figure that out. Life has an amazing ability to adapt, and it doesn't shock us, but it's more wonder at how well life can adapt to changes in the environment. So I'm hopeful. We might have slightly different oceans 50 years from now than we do now, but I'm optimistic that those oceans will still carry with it that wonder and the desire to explore and understand. Same thing we're doing now, and same thing that people were doing 100 years ago.
Amazing. And on that note, I know that our oceans are probably on this earth one of the least researched and discovered, especially when you go deep and deep. And there must be maybe people who don't have much knowledge in the background of ocean research. They might think that there's maybe multiple ways of doing ocean research, right? Like doing actual surveys or using other types of data forms. But why do you think sound in particular is so crucial in doing oceanographic research?
Sound underwater is amazing. So on land, we are more visual creatures. That's our dominant sensory modality. And sound is that dominant sensory modality underwater, even for humans. So much of the technology that humans use to understand and monitor the ocean is based in acoustics, because acoustics, the sound waves underwater, travel much further and much faster than light does. So if you think about the ocean, only the very top layer actually has the light that penetrates to a certain depth. Beyond that photic zone, a vast majority of the ocean is dark. And so light isn't possible for sensory modality deep in the ocean or even at night. and animals in the ocean have evolved the ability to sense sound, both the pressure component of sound, like pressure waves, and the particle motion of sound. For example, fish have a lateral line that they can sense the movement of the water particles through their lateral line, and that would be part of sound sensing. I believe that all animals in the ocean that have been examined show the ability to receive sound, to sense sound. They may not all make sound, but the fact that they can sense sound means that they are using some component of sound to understand the world around them.
So you've been involved in this research for a long time now, and what are some of the coolest or most interesting facts about the ocean you learned about that you may have not expected before, even when you're early on, like when you're first studying in college and stuff, and now that you've done your own research behind it, what are some of the most surprising facts you learned about life in the ocean?
I don't know if this is life in the ocean, but one of the things that I found, and I still find amazing, is that at about 1,000 meters, because of the way that the physical properties of the ocean are from the surface to the bottom, there's what's called a SOFAR channel, which is a channel at about 1,000 meters in the ocean that traps sound. So I find it amazing that a sound made in one part of the global ocean, if it's low frequency enough, can be heard and picked up on the other side of the ocean, which means whales that are using these low frequencies are communicating or potentially communicating to others of their own species across an ocean basin, for example. And that's one of the things that we as humans haven't yet been able to really assess, because that spatial difference between the source, a singing whale, for example, and potential receivers could be tens to hundreds of kilometers away. How do we know who those potential receivers are? And so it's one of those things that I continuously wonder how we will ever be able to get a handle on sort of long distance whale communication.
And when you talk about identifying the individual receivers, are you talking about what species is sending the signal, or like which whale even within the same species?
Which whale within the same species? They're called conspecific. So animals of the same species are conspecific. So they're, for example, humpback whales, most popular known for their humpback whale song. And a male humpback whale will sing for hours on end. And it's related in some way to its mating system. And it's thought that that song functions to attract females. So when that whale sings, what females are actually receiving that call from tens of kilometers away? And, is that communication effective? So it's kind of interesting to think that there's an entire communication system where we know what the source is doing, the singing humpback whale, but we have no idea what those receivers are doing once they receive that signal.
So I could see how a humpback whale making a sound, attracting females could be, or just attracting mates could be a useful thing to do within the like a few tens of kilometers. But when we expand the time horizon to, as you said, like thousands of kilometers away, the sound can travel. Do we know at all, like possibly what the sound can be used for from the different whales? Like, is it maybe used for like migration purposes or for anything like that, or do we have any ideas or hypotheses behind that, or?
So the songs that the large whales sing have been thought to maybe serve two functions. One, when you're singing, you're broadcasting your fitness to females. And so that's directly related to mating. Another philosophy, which could be in addition to that function, is that males are singing to space themselves out from other singing whales. So sort of like territory establishment. Lots of hypotheses, believe it or not, it's still an active area of research. So we don't know everything about what whale song means to the whales yet.
Cool. So talk to me about how you decided to follow this path of scientific research in terms of marine acoustics. Like how early on, like was it from childhood, you're like you had some fascination with the ocean? Did it develop more with time and you kind of just made decisions every day that led you down this path? Or where would you see that start to ignite early on?
So I think I could pretty much pinpoint my interest in marine mammals from when I was younger, my parents took us to the Mystic Aquarium and we saw the show with the dolphins and the beluga whales and the sea lions. And from that point on, I wanted to be a dolphin trainer. And that interest sustained through middle school. I remember we were in history in middle school and the teacher asked, what do we want to do when we grow up? And I said, I want to be a dolphin trainer. And he goes, you'll grow out of that. Well, I never grew out of it, really. I loved science in high school. I loved science in college. I went to Harvard University. They didn't have a huge marine biology program or anybody working with marine mammals at that time. So I ended up getting my first research experience in a primate lab. So this primate lab was looking at cognition and acoustic communication, which introduced me to acoustics for the first time. So I was using a software that allowed me to see on the screen what I was hearing the monkeys vocalize. So those were called spectrograms, and I was fascinated. I love the idea of trying to understand the different calls that the primates were making and what those functions were. So when I graduated from undergraduate, I wanted to take what I learned in terms of acoustics and apply it to the underwater world. And so I reached out to a researcher at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Dr. Peter Tyak, and I ended up being a guest student there for a year, working on a project with dolphin communication, dolphins in captivity, looking at how they formed their different whistle repertoires. And I loved it. And so I knew that I wanted to continue doing this. So I actually then met two postdocs while I was doing that guest studentship at Woods Hole Oceanographic, who became colleagues and both hired at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. That was Doctors John Buck and Doctors Richard Connor. And so I ended up doing a master's program there because I did not know if I wanted to devote the next 6 to 8 years of my life to get a PhD. I did my master's. I said, I really like this science thing. I want to get a PhD. So I went to the University of Rhode Island Graduate School of Oceanography, where I had one advisor in oceanography and one in ocean engineering, which allowed me to do marine mammal acoustics. I worked on manatees for my PhD. So it just all kind of evolved with opportunity started by my love for the ocean and marine mammals. And when I started my first job at Penn State after my postdocs, I really started to look at more of the ecosystem as a whole. So not just the marine mammals, but the water itself and prey, and started to really look at ecosystem dynamics, pretty much from wind all the way to whales you can look at with acoustics. And so that has been sort of the umbrella that I've worked under since my master's, really.
Was there ever a stage along the journey where there was maybe a sort of confusion or maybe an alternative opportunity that opened up that was more on a different direction than ocean acoustics? And was there ever a point where you had to sit back and decide that, do I really want to keep going down this path, or is this new opportunity I want to pick up?
There wasn't a pivot in terms of ocean acoustics, but I never imagined that I would be a research faculty member. That wasn't my goal. I thought with my PhD that my goal really was to go into consulting, marine acoustics consulting. And I was very fortunate that when I was finishing up my PhD, I had the opportunity to intern at a marine consulting company. It was the best internship because I learned that I didn't really like acoustic consulting. And so I say that's great. I mean, it was great because I had the opportunity to learn it was not something that I wanted to do with my career. And I was very fortunate to learn that before I landed a permanent job in that field. And at that point, I started to think, well, what else can I do? And colleagues that I had formed relationships with over the course of my PhD, one of them reached out and said, hey, come to Penn State and give a seminar. And this was Dr. Dave Bradley. And he's like, yeah, that sounds great. And I went out there to give that seminar. And I talked to a bunch of people who worked for the Applied Research Lab then. And I called home to my husband and said, pack up the house. This is where I want to be. It was great to be able to find a job that was just research focused. So I'm research faculty, which is a little bit different than, tenured or tenure track faculty that teach at a university. They're on hard money and get paid by their university for 9 months of their time. Whereas I'm a research faculty, what's called soft money, which means I have to bring in external grants to support my salary, my research, my graduate students, for example. So it's a little bit more unstable than the hard money tenure track, but it allows me more flexibility to go out to sea, for example, for a month in the middle of the year. And so I have really loved my position being a research faculty member.
I think a lot of people at the high school level may be interested in science. It's a pretty big, broad subject area, and they might be interested in pursuing science, but I don't think a lot of people get an early experience working in a lab. And because of that, I wonder if, I know high school was a long time ago, but do you think that maybe actually when you went to college and started working in research labs, and even now when you're part of a lab, does it feel different than maybe what you imagine it would be like? Like I know at our level, we kind of understand what the scientific method is and the concept of research, but is working in an actual lab different than maybe what you imagined it would be, if you can remember that, what that felt like?
I think in high school, so I went to the petty school where you went. And one of the things I think that I left high school with was an intellectual curiosity about science. I was constantly asking questions. So I think at a high school stage, I mean, I knew nothing about acoustics when I left high school, but I was intellectually curious about science. And I think that that is the most important thing to bring with you into science is that intellectual curiosity. And that can happen from high school on up. Um, Getting a foundation in math and physics for me was crucial. I have to say, math and physics were not my favorite subjects in high school or college. I actually stopped taking math as quickly as I could after I got my requirements, which took me up through multivariate calculus and linear algebra. But when I started to appreciate acoustics, that math and physics, it was great to be able to pull on that knowledge. So I didn't really enjoy it or recognize the value of it at the time, but now I do. And so that's something that I hope that I can share and impart to any high school classrooms that I talk to or undergraduates that join my lab. Getting that hands-on experience is the exciting part, really. Going to sea is the exciting part. But what people don't realize is that for every week of data, you're analyzing that data when you get back for maybe a month or up to a year, because there's so much that goes into the analysis process and you're sitting in front of a computer. So not all science is that pull and that dreamy like excitement of going to sea. A lot of science is processing data and running statistics. And so you really do have to appreciate all of it.
So your main advice to someone at high school level would be to find a way to access your intellectual curiosity. And I know that I
Yeah.
say it in that way because I think we all do have that curiosity, but maybe we're not always in touch with it. And I think, at least if I look at my own life and people I've talked to, it takes work to try to cut back the layers of maybe the structure that's defined for you, trying to find like what's deeply curious to you. So that's what I think. So from based on what you said, would be the biggest like useful source that someone at a high school level could take.
Yep. Yep. And learning to think critically, reading something and not just blindly accepting it, really thinking about it. And thinking critically is, I think, a really great characteristic to carry with you throughout your career. I have graduate students, master's students that often start with me that they don't have that skill of thinking critically beyond, okay, this is a method and these were the results. But when I say think critically, I think, well, how did that scientific study advance the field? What was the question that they were seeking to answer when they started, and did they achieve answering that question? So thinking more beyond just what methods and results are on why it was important, what gap that science was filling, and how did it advance the field. So I think any opportunity to hone skills of critical thinking is important.
How do you think you developed this skill or ability to think critically?
It started in high school. I had a physics class with a teacher named Tim Corica,
Well,
and we had to
graduating.
build. We had to build. I can't even remember what kind of machine it was, and I was terrible at it, terrible, and I just could not get this thing to work. And it took. I was the last one done, but troubleshooting, I think, is a good way of getting you to think critically and outside of the box. A lot of times, troubleshooting is uncomfortable for most people, because you don't know what the answer is, right? And you're trying to figure something out, and not knowing sometimes is uncomfortable. But I think that that is sort of a precursor to critical thinking. Troubleshooting kind of leads to critical thinking, because in science, we're almost all troubleshooters all of the time.
Yeah, I think Petty does a good job with that. Cause I've noticed at least recently a lot of the courses are designed in that way to make it primarily a troubleshooting type of class where you're just trying to figure it out on your own. I mean,
Yeah.
something with MPS2 honors, like pretty much every math course I've taken at Petty has been structured in that way. So
Yeah, the new philosophy is to have the students work the problems in the course instead of the teacher, and to problem solve is a great way to do that, even in the math courses. And so you learn more about the math and the concepts than just memorizing a theorem in a textbook. And so I really like that hands-on approach, because we all learn in different ways. Some people learn great from textbooks, which is still there. The textbook's still there, but you're reading it for homework and doing the problems during the day in the class. And some people learn best by hands-on experiences. So I love the fact that classrooms are now incorporating hands-on learning in the classroom.
right. Tell me more about your marine acoustics. Sorry, your CBAS program, the Marine Bioacoustics Program. You mentioned it's something you're really proud about. So I want to learn more because I don't think we talked about this before.
Yeah, somebody asked me years ago, what are you most proud of in your career? And I thought about it, and my answer was this CBAS program. So CBAS is a marine bioacoustic summer school program that's for graduate students. And so most universities don't have a full faculty to address multiple aspects of marine bioacoustics. They may have one faculty member or one class. And so CBAS brings together 9 to 10 presenters from around the world on different topics, all in one place. So graduate students who are participating in the CBAS program get to learn multiple dimensions of marine bioacoustics in 1 week, in one place, from 9 to 10 different people. That's not available at any other college around the globe that I know of. So it's very unique. So my colleague, Dr. Susan Parks, and I started this when we were both at Penn State. In 2008 was our first one. We just finished CBAS actually last week, in 2024. So we're coming up on 20 years of CBAS, and the 30 students each time that come through. It is really a highlight of their academic journey, because not only do they get to hear all these presenters, we're all eating and sleeping in the same buildings and dorms with the students. We're going on social. So it becomes a networking and a peer team building experience. And many of the peers the students meet in CBAS, they work with the rest of their careers. Some of the stories I've heard from CBAS students, there was a student that came to CBAS at a really rough time in her life, was getting ready to drop out of grad school, and CBAS was the one thing that turned it around. Meeting all those people, making those connections, helped her stay in the field. And I've heard that a lot from different people. And it's really nice. One of the evenings that we do, we have sort of a career workshop where all the presenters give a little 5 to 10 minute story about how they got to where they were. And no one ever imagined that they would be working in acoustics, because it's not something that you grow up knowing a whole lot about. You kind of find acoustics in grad school for the most part. I wish that wasn't true, but it is. And what you had to do, I mean, I had to waitress and bartend sometimes just to make ends meet, because grad students don't get paid very much. Luckily for me, I was a swimmer and I could coach. At UMass Dartmouth, I was the assistant swim coach during my master's degree. And so we do what we need to make ends meet, to feed our love of science and that education. And so CBAS provides a lot to the students outside of just scientific concepts. It provides a peer group, it provides networking and seeing authors on papers that you might read, but meeting them in real life and realizing they're people just like you are. And so it creates a community that I am extremely proud of.
Amazing. Yeah. Talk to me about how you built it up, like how it's evolved. I know you mentioned it's been almost 20 years in the making. So in what ways has it evolved over time and become something?
Actually, it hasn't really evolved over time. So when we started it, we modeled it after another short course called PASS, the Physical Acoustics Summer School, and ours is Bioacoustics Summer School, CBAS. And so we modeled it understanding that hands-on experiences are important. So from the very first CBAS in 2008, each presenter spends about they each get a half a day. So we ask them to spend 1.5 to 2 hours providing a tutorial on the general concepts of the topic that they are talking about. And then the second 1.5 to 2 hours is either group problem solving, performing an experiment, demoing software. We have one for density estimation where people go out with their cell phones and play recordings of a wild haggis sound. And they go all around the campus doing
Wild
this.
haggis, is that an animal or?
No, it's a fictional, it's a fictitious animal. But
Okay.
we created this sort of fantasy density estimation problem, a lab or a problem set, and the students worked on together. And so having each day be both hands-on and sort of traditional learning has been very, very successful and popular. And we always do that career kind of workshop and focus on one of the afternoon or evening sessions. We have another session where students present posters. Now it's evolved into PowerPoint slides for 3 minutes on what they're doing. So they get feedback not only from their peers, but from all the presenters that are there. And the presenters stay all week with the students. And so that has been the model that we created CBAS from back in 2008, and we still use it today. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, some of the topics have changed. We rotate topics in and out. We always have a hot topic session, and so we're able to advance with advances in technology and innovation in science. Our topics may change, and even the hardware that we're using may change, but the structure of CBAS stays the same.
Cool. You talked about this 6Ps framework. So how about you tell me more about that?
That was my father's mantra growing up. So he calls it used to be the 5 Ps. Prior planning prevents poor performance. Throughout time, we added another P in there. Prior planning prevents piss poor performance. And I grew up hearing this all the time, which essentially means do your homework, plan, and you will be more successful. And I think that's something that my children have grown up with, just hearing it from their grandfather. And for me, it's really easy to look in hindsight and say, oh, I could have planned for that better. But if you go into things and approach it with a 6P philosophy, the chances for success are increased.
Yeah, I've heard that even if you just put 20 minutes of preparation before a meeting, like it'll be that much better.
Oh yeah, when you plan to go to sea, so you're loading up your experiment to go to sea, you're going to be on a boat for 4 to 6 weeks. if you forget something, you cannot like go to the Home Depot and go get it, right? You are stuck with whatever is on that boat. So for field work, especially, prior planning happens months ahead of time as you're ordering parts and this and that. And chances are every single time I have gone to sea, something is broken or something has been forgotten. And we're back to troubleshooting. Here we are again. You've got to troubleshoot to make your experiment or your science mission successful.
Talk to me
That
about,
troubleshooting never leaves. It follows you everywhere.
yeah, it's incredible. Talk to me about some of the trips that you've been on for these overseas for months on end. So you can maybe talk about some of the recent ones you've done over the last year. I know that sometimes I try to email you and I get that email bounce back, so you're away at sea again.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
talk about like some of the goals of these trips, and I know it's a lot of with marine acoustics, you're probably just trying to collect data, but beyond that, like what are some of the more recent trips you've been on?
So over the past 2 to 3 years, all of our trips have been in the Gulf of Maine. And so we luckily have great vessels, but we go out in crappy weather. So we've gone out in the winter. And so the Gulf of Maine, northern Gulf of Maine in the winter is a terrible place to be. But sometimes you can't choose when there's ship availability. So that's tough. And when we go out there, we are usually servicing instruments that have been left out for a year, getting them back, getting the data and putting them back on. And then at night, we do biological sampling with nets because the animals that we're interested in often spend the day deeper in the water because they don't want to be eaten by predators. And at night, they come up to feed. And so a lot of the net tows that we do as a project team happen at night. And so we alternate between mooring or lander operations during the day and more biological sampling at night. So we do that in the Gulf of Maine, and we've done that as part of another project on the outer continental shelf from Virginia down to about Florida, much warmer, calmer weather. That was much nicer. And then I spent 10 years going out to sea for weeks on end in the Bering Sea, and that was always very interesting.
Where's the Bering Sea?
Excuse me?
Where's the Bering Sea?
It's right off the coast of Alaska by the Aleutian Islands. And that's always fun because you never know what's going to happen. I woke up one morning and the ship was all quiet. I was like, oh, that's not good. When a ship is quiet, it's never good. And I run up to the bridge where the captain was, and I look out and we're stuck in an ice sheet. And I'm like, great. So he's like, yeah, we're going to give it 24, 48 hours to blow out, and which it did. So we didn't have to worry about anything. I was once doing an impact study looking at the effect of sound on fish down on Scott's Reef, which is between Indonesia and Australia. And we're on the back of the deck and we hear an announcement come over the speakers. You've got like 20 minutes to clear the deck. A tsunami warning was just issued for our area. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, we're in a reef. We're at low tide. You can get out and walk on sand in the middle of the ocean. And so that was a little scary. This was the first time I ever asked a captain, do I have to be afraid for my life? And he's like, no. You probably won't even notice it, but we're going to take precaution. Everything was fine. Okay. But I did call home to let people know that, that tsunami that has, traversed this area, I'm safe. So that was good. So you just never know what you're going to find.
Do you think that was the most dangerous experience you've had, or is there any other experience you could think
of? Oh gosh, no. Every time you go to sea, going to sea is not safe in general. I mean, it's as safe as it can be. You take risks. But when you're out there working on the deck at night, chances are if you fall overboard, especially in the northern Gulf of Maine where it's freezing cold, you've got 10 minutes maybe to live if you don't have a survival suit on. So there's always that risk and that reminder that what you're doing is risky. It is risky. And so, yeah, there were times where one vessel we were on, it was so cold and it was so rough in the northern Gulf of Maine that we had to go in and anchor in a Penobscot Bay. And after 2 days, the storm blew through and we went to bring up the anchor, and it was so cold that the hydraulics on the ship froze. And we had to, take a welding torch and weld the anchor off of the boat so we could move the boat. So yeah, we're out there in dangerous weather. But you just do your best to be safety. You've always got your personal safety gear. The ship has its safety gear. You're always looking out for the people who are with you. It's a team sport out there when you're on a vessel. Oceanography, at least offshore oceanography, it is truly a team sport.
When you mentioned that if you fall overboard, you have 10 minutes to live, is that primarily because of the temperature of the water? You might have
Yes.
hypothermia, or is
Yeah.
it additionally, like, what are some of the other like major dangers besides like the weather? Do you think there's any marine type of danger that's much less?
Well, if you fall overboard on a boat at night, it's more risky because it's hard to find one person in rough weather, right? So the chances of you being recovered by the vessel that you fell off of is is low, even if the water's warm. And so, yeah, overboard, I think, is the biggest danger when you go out to sea. I never want to find myself or anyone that I know in that situation. I can't imagine. It's scary to me. The
Yeah,
ocean's big.
yeah. Ocean is a scary place. You also wrote a lot about the idea of honest communication, and I found that really interesting because I've had conversations with people about the theme of honesty and telling the truth, and it's always been this difficult thing because when you tell someone the immediate truth, there's so many consequences behind that we try to shy away from, and then it only ends up building over time, and it follows like an exponential trend, and then years on the line, you really see the consequences of that. So I was thinking about the theme of honesty a lot in my life, but I want to hear from you as well. What are your thoughts behind the idea of honest communication?
Honesty in communication, whether it's professional or personal, wherever, is a very um, a value of mine that is pretty much uncompromised. At work, if you make a mistake or something happens, I have found that being honest about it and taking accountability for things that you could have done better or you were mistakes. A, you learn about it, and B, it conveys to whoever it is you're interacting with a high level of personal integrity to be able to say, I messed up. I am sorry. How can I fix this? That personal integrity I find that comes with honesty is invaluable because that's how good relationships are made. And I think that even in my personal life and with family, to even tell your kids sometimes, oh, I made a mistake, or I'm sorry, I messed this up, or I forgot this. Um, Being able to take accountability and be honest, I think is the thing that brings people together more often than not.
Yeah.
And so that's why I value it so highly.
I think when we're struggling to admit our mistakes, the immediate feeling we get is that if we admit our mistake, people will think less of us and they'll reveal something about us that we don't want them to see. Which, even though we feel that every time we're about to maybe lie and not admit our mistake, I feel that if anyone comes to me and admits their mistake, I have more respect for them. So I think it's like
Exactly.
kind of an irony
Yeah.
that I think back to this one example. We were traveling somewhere, we were doing paddleboarding in a lake, and it was me, my dad, my sister, and my mother. We were all just doing paddleboarding, and we had one tour guide who had given us the paddleboards and was going with us. And for some reason, my mom, she was always lagging behind us. She was always a couple meters behind us, and we were kind of laughing at her like, catch up, catch up. You're going really slow." And I mean, I don't know what kind of thought she must have been going through her head at the time. Like, wow, am I like not fit? Am I not athletic? Am I not healthy? As we're all just like very quickly going beyond her. And then we're doing the paddleboarding for 2 hours. We finish off and we're sitting in our car, and the paddleboard guy comes up to us and tells us that her paddleboard was broken. And then I think having that honesty, like immediately, like if I were in that position, it'd be scary. Like, will they start yelling at me? Like, will they want to like take their money back? Will they get angry at me? Like, what are they gonna do to me if I'm the person operating the paddleboard? But I think all of us, we immediately just had respect for him for coming and telling us the truth. So it's this weird irony that I'm trying to think about more as well.
It's human nature. No one wants to appear wrong or weak or feel guilty about anything. And so that's just human nature. And I think that if you can approach your humanity with truth, it it's a strength. And I think other people recognize it as a strength. And so I try and teach that to my children. It's one of our family rules that are posted on in our house is always be truthful. So, yeah, my children sometimes have learned that the hard way.
And in addition to admitting your mistakes, I think we can expand the concept of honesty and truth also just to telling the truth in general, even if it's not a mistake you made, but just telling the truth about a situation, maybe when there's consequences behind it. And also, just being honest with yourself. I think we try to
Wow.
delude ourselves a lot. I think historically in the past, I've tried to delude myself by telling myself a false reality of the world, which I think is just natural. But I think being
And
honest with yourself is also really critical, especially if you want to develop yourself as a person and you're able to see aspects of yourself that maybe you're not great in as well that you could improve in. But I don't think you can ever make a step in the right direction if you're not honest with yourself. But,
that's true. You want to look back at your life, and those that can look back on their lives with few or no regrets are much happier people in general. And so
sorry to cut you off. I can hear you, but your audio is very muffled now.
I have no idea
Oh,
why.
I can hear you
Nothing.
now. I think when you get closer, it's better.
Okay, is that better?
That's better, yeah.
All right. I what was I saying? I was just saying that
People regret, I think.
when you look back on your life, those people that are, I find in my experience, those people that are happiest are those that can look back with few or no regrets. You know, they're not good at everything. They might have not made the best decisions in times, but if you do it with a good heart, and you don't let opportunities pass you by, even if you fail, at least you tried, right? That's at the end of the day, even if you didn't succeed, at least you tried. And I think that that's important. And being honest with yourself comes with that. So, don't make excuses for yourself. Just do it.
Um, Another thing you wrote was that you don't always have the answers, but it's important to be asking questions, and it's okay if you don't have the clarity to know everything in the world, but you can still maybe take action. And I think when we talk about your early like childhood as well, like going to high school, and you didn't have all the answers about maybe like where your life path would take you, but you kind of followed the what was simple at the time, that you have this interest in this area, so let's just go there. And then maybe you talked about the importance of asking questions, so we can expand on those two ideas.
I think it comes back to that intellectual curiosity is based on asking questions. But in my job, I'm an educator. I work with undergraduates, graduates, general public. I constantly find myself in the role of an educator. And so people ask questions. They ask great questions sometimes. And I don't always have the answers. And I'm okay saying, I don't know that, but I know someone who could answer this better than me. Let me put you in touch with that. So when I say that I don't know all the answers, I'm okay with not having those answers, because I can somehow figure out how to get the person to somebody else that may know that answer. And so I don't feel pressured to have all the answers. So that's for people asking questions of me. And, you know, sort of me asking questions, I work with a team of people that have different expertises and skill than I do. And for example, we at UNH are putting in a cabled acoustic array in the Gulf of Maine in a few months. And so I've had to work with the cable engineers. I know nothing about installing cables in the bottom of the ocean. And they had an entire different language that I did not understand. So I was constantly asking, like, what is that? What does that mean? And in some cases, it may have made me feel a little weird to stop somebody and ask them such a simple question, but I truly didn't understand. But being able to ask that question um, and develop that language allowed me to do my job better. And so I'm constantly learning, especially when you work with people who have skills that you don't. Just being able to develop a language that you can speak back and forth effectively and communicate is important. And you can't do that if you don't ask questions.
Yeah, perfect. Um, when you think about your life outside of the work that you do, what are some of the other aspects or pillars of your life that you value that are really important to you? Like I know, for example, you spend a lot of time hiking. So what are maybe some of the other pillars of your life? And you mentioned hiking, family, that are important to you.
Family is number one, absolutely number one. I have three children. I had my first daughter when I was a grad student, had my second daughter when I was a postdoc, and we adopted my third daughter when I was at Penn State. She was a teenager from the foster care system, and I did all of that while balancing a career. And so family has always come first. And the way that I'm able to be successful in doing what I'm doing is because of the strength of my family. So family first to me, and that's how I treat everybody I interact with. Family first. You know, if there's something that requires you to not be here because you need to be somewhere else, then that's where you need to be. So I think family is definitely the first pillar in my life. Work, again, very important pillar. And now that my kids are a little older in finishing high school and in college, I'm finding that I have a lot of satisfaction with hobbies that I didn't have the opportunity to do when you're raising a young family. You know, you kind of put yourself on the back burner, and because there's just no time sometimes. So now I've really enjoyed hiking. I'm on a quest or a journey to do the 48 4,000-foot summits in New Hampshire. We actually moved to a lake 2 years ago because I love open water swimming. And when I moved to New Hampshire, I fell in love with open water swimming in lakes. And so why wait until you're retired to move somewhere that you want to move? So 2 years ago, we moved to a lake here in New Hampshire. We had to build a house. So we lived in an RV in our driveway for a year and a half plus while this house was being built. And now we have this beautiful house on a lake. And I'm so glad we did it, because now I can not only go open water swimming whenever I want. It's just so nice to come around the bend when I get home. I guess I never truly realized how just your surroundings can be such a big quality of life impact. When I come home and I sit on my deck and I look at the lake, whether it's raining or covered with snow, it just makes me happy. So quality of life, I think, is the third pillar. However that is, for whatever it is that makes you happy, that quality of life is important. And I wish I did it sooner. I mean, there's no way I could have done it sooner, but if there was, I would have done it sooner.
Amazing. Yeah. I like how you mentioned that the quality of life is reflected based on your environment you're in. Because I was actually thinking about the same idea a couple months ago when I was at Petty. And I thought that if I thought about like why my life was good, like there were definitely like 3 or 4 different things I could define as like these pillars of my life make my life meaningful. But then I think in the background of that all happening is just like seeing the Petty Lake every day, like spending time walking around campus. I think just seeing the chapel. I think the beauty of Petty's campus also contributed to that in the background, which is why I think as I grow older, like I think just living in an environment that maybe like for me, I like nature a lot. So living in an environment that has more nature, more beauty, I value that a lot more now that I had that realization while at Petty. Um, but going back to the two main pillars you mentioned with family and work, you mentioned that you were able to find a lot of career success despite having family as your number one priority. So how were you able to balance the two? And was it ever an issue for you, or you were able to manage it quite well over the years?
Yeah, there's always things that come up. Kids get sick, a last minute work things come up. That happens all the time. And I think that my secret weapon is my family. My husband, extremely supportive of my job and my career. So that makes a big difference. And as my kids got older, they were extremely supportive of my career on the family side. And I've always had the luck, I guess, of working for people who had the same values as I do. And so I've always worked in an environment at a university for people and with people that respected family. And so it was never too hard. There are always, individual hard things. But for example, when we worked at Penn State, my husband and I both worked at Penn State, and we had a rule that if one person was at sea or out of the country, the other one could not be out of the country. They had to be home.
Mhm.
And both of our jobs worked around that for years. And so, as long as the communication's open and you do a good job at home and you do a good job at work, then I think that that's sort of the key. And boundaries, I think, play a lot into that. So my philosophy is when I'm at work, work gets 100% of my attention. When I'm at home, my family gets 100% of my attention. So I let people know, people that work with me, my students, my colleagues, they know that I'm pretty much not answering emails or looking at emails when I leave work until I get back the next day. And I don't work on the weekend unless I'm at sea or, there's a reason to be here. But um, my colleagues know and respect the fact that when I'm at home and with family, I'm at home and with family. And that's kept me sane.
On the contrary, do you think in a way your career is better off because of your family? And the reason I ask is because the way you describe your family, it seems like they really fuel the work you do. And try to link that back, like an analogy I thought of in my life is that I used to think that wrestling would be a detriment to my academic work, but for some reason when I was in season, my grades were better and I felt like I was more focused on work at the same time because I think it kind of fuels you in a way and it gives your life more of that meaning that I felt a lot in the winter time that I hadn't felt in other periods of the year. So in a similar way, do you think that your career is better off because of the family that supports you in that way, or?
Absolutely. And I think for two different reasons, or maybe three. One is simple. They're just supportive of my career, and that's great. Number two, when you have another aspect of your life that is important, like family, it really motivates you to be as efficient as you can at work. So you're productive. Just like wrestling, or in my case, when I was in high school and college, swimming, when you're trying to engage in something that's also important to you, you have to be efficient with your time. So time management definitely improves, I think, in that capacity. Um, there was one other thing with family perspective. That was it. The third thing, at work, there are all sorts of things that are priorities and fires you have to put out, and you can be overwhelmed by that. But if you have another touch point in life, like family or an activity of some sort, it allows you to step away from work and gain a little bit more perspective. And so I think that that has been healthy for me in balancing my career. Family has surely that they're as much of success as a whole as and a part of my career as I am.
Amazing. And you mentioned that you were able to very efficiently navigate your attention in a way where when you're in work, you're very focused on the work. When you're at home, you're very focused with your family. And I think that requires like a great strength in your attention. And I know you mentioned before that a big problem that people have today is their fleeting attention, and now they have like a shorter attention span. So talk to me more about that. Like, what do you think this problem really started from, and like why is this problem so important to you?
Um, yeah, I think your question, what was your question? What is the biggest problem or something, I think,
Yeah.
in the world today?
Yeah.
And I think I replied short attention spans. I mean, technology, social media, um, Amazon, DoorDash, all of these things really lend themselves to instant gratification. Emailing your phone now is not just a phone, it's a little computer that you walk around with, and people can get in touch with you all of the time. Again, instant gratification. All of these little sound bites for Snapchat and so forth, getting tweets to get the most information out in the least amount of time, really, um, has really had an impact, I think, on society, that people are have short attention spans. I think paying attention to something takes practice, and it's a decision that you make to pay attention to something. And one of the things that, I mean, and I'm guilty of this at times too, absolutely. But being in science and being in a position to advance science and address society's challenges like food security or energy security, it's not something that happens quickly. It's something that really requires a lot of attention and time. And I think that as I watch students come through my lab and through the university, that short attention span is something that I worry about, will people in the future, will there be those special few that can really dedicate themselves and have the patience and attention to detail that is required to move our society forward?
Yeah. Building off of what you said, I think there are both personal implications in your own life and also like broader societal implication that you touched upon. And when we talk about all the apps on our phone that are all stealing our attention away, I think something I've been reading about more recently that's shocked me a lot is that the degree to which these companies actually put effort into optimizing every little factor to addict you. And this is not related to attention, but I think it gives us a perspective into how the companies do it. I read a story about Pringles, and the if you think about the shape of a Pringle, it's like a hyperbolic paraboloid. And
Yeah.
I read about that the reason they shaped it like a hyperbolic paraboloid is because when it's in your mouth, your tongue has the maximum number of taste buds in contact with the Pringle at once. And but when you bite the Pringle, it breaks in half, and then it kind of has a positive emotion followed by a negative emotion that makes you crave another positive emotion again. Which I don't know the degree to which that's true, but I think the more and more I read about the way they're optimizing the color of this notification and the sound of this notification. And I look at some of the apps that I've also used in the past, like Snapchat, for example. I think it's very if you just look at it as a concept, it's basically taking every human evolved evolutionary strategy for being social and just putting it on steroids without giving you pretty much any reward back. Like I think if anyone looks at Snapchat who's never used it before, you look at, okay, you send a picture to each other every day, you get a streak, and then the streak doesn't give you anything, but for some reason it's some psychological thing in the back of your mind that just wants to keep growing that streak. And I think in so many ways these apps are just designing it to steal our attention. But I think it is really a problem because I think when I've noticed in myself that when I used to use these apps a lot more frequently, I did struggle paying attention to things, and always be jumping from task to task, even when I'm doing homework assignments and things like that. And oh, let me just check my email real quick because maybe someone emailed me something important. But I think I've made it a mission of my life in the last 2 years to cut that back, and I did. I'm proud. I think when I look at the achievements I've made in my life, I think that one. I mean, I've not made many so far. I look forward to making more and more as I grow older. But I think one thing I'm proud about the most of is my ability to I think I deleted all the apps and I was able to hopefully restore my attention span in a way. Um, I got my screen time down for maybe like 4 or 5 months to 20 minutes a day on my phone, which I was really proud about that I wasn't I was picking it up maybe less than like 5 or 6 times a day when I really need to use it. And I think because of that, like even when I go back on the apps now, if I ever download it, I feel like they don't steal my attention as much anymore because even if I have Instagram on my phone, like I'll go 5 days without even touching it. I'm like, oh yeah, it's there. If I need it for something, it's there. And I think maybe that's what people need. Maybe they just need time away from it to develop that skill and then going back to it. But I think it definitely takes some intervention because if I go on autopilot again, then all of a sudden they're gonna be stealing my attention away and I won't even realize it happening in the background.
It's like an addiction. It truly is. You can be addicted to your phone. I know people that are. Growing up in a family with kids, the rule in our family was you could not bring your phone to the table. And so that dinner time when we were all together was time for conversation. And that was from day one. Like even my husband and I, we do not bring our phones to the table. And it wasn't until my kids were, older teenagers that they went to other people's houses and realized that there are people that eat in front of the TV and families that don't eat together and so forth. And B, they've looked around restaurants and we'll see couples out eating dinner together, but both on their phones. And they saw value in that time of discussion. And that made me so proud as a parent, that they've recognized it and then had value for how they were raised. And so I think it starts at home with just boundaries. I think you're as you go through and look at this interview, different topics just keep coming up. Boundaries, truth, communication. It's kind of funny that those things just keep coming back up in different ways.
Yeah, I'm really happy you were able to do that with your family, and I'm hoping that more people can take that as a lesson from you and try to implement that in their own life as well. Because I think that, especially those, even if you spend a lot of time if you think about a family in general, that okay, we have schoolwork to do, we have office to attend, and then I think those critical times in the day, like dinner meals together, those are the times that the family can really come together, even when we have such a busy lifestyle, to come together and just talk to each other. And the fact that I think like 90% of the households in America are probably just spending those dinners distracted as well. I think it could not only improve the lives of those families, but also just improve society as a whole, because I think spending time away from it, it's also made me more happier as a person and just more social. And it's improved my life in many ways. And I hope that we can continue to make those good decisions.
I agree with that. All the things that we have access to, I hope in this as society evolves, that we use them to make our life better and not let those things distract us from what could be a better life. So I agree with you 100%.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really enjoyed this discussion. Learned a
Me
lot
too.
about your life, marine in general, and even other broader implications of like family, defining success, communication, as we touched on. So I'd love to do this again at some point, and maybe we can also meet if I'm ever in the area or you're coming down to Jersey. Just always let me know. But
Oh
thank you,
yeah, absolutely. If you come up to New Hampshire, let us know.
of course. Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, you too.
If you enjoyed that episode, then you're going to love this episode right here. Make sure you click here to watch that video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.